Welcome back. So we're playing again on this piece. This is our layer 4 that we're starting. And I think I'm kind of seeing a jellyfish. It would be upside down in this position, but I'm kind of seeing it right here. So I'm just going to fill that in and give you an idea of how I just kind of see what's there and then try to build around it. I have a really bright light coming in from my window I'm trying to block, but if you see that contrast there, it's just the lighting from the window and not anything with paint. I'm using matte medium to just spread out the color that I already put on the canvas. By doing that, it gives me this sort of gradation in translucency, where it's more opaque in some places, a little more translucent in others. I think that adds just a nice variation, just a nice variation in color for the background. This brush is very fun because it has these kind of intermittent long and short bristles, and because of that you can get these really thin, sorry, I'm trying to get the right level of paint and water on here. You can get these fun parallel thin lines, which I just love. And depending on how wet the paint is that you're mixing here, like this black is pretty damp, where over here it's a little drier. So for the drier parts, if I want to go in again and add a darker color, it isn't going to blend as much. But over here, if I tried that, it would still really bleed out into each other, which is just fine. The trick is knowing that, so then you can use that however you want, like with a high contrast kind of thing. So then they'll bleed together and gradiate more. I sort of like this part of the background there, so I'm just kind of removing bits and pieces of this to allow it to kind of transition from something very formed back into what the background is. So here I'm doing a lot of vertical lines like this because it will give it a somewhat consistent look in the background in a way that it's maybe just sort of implied underwater shapes. And we'll play with that a little more to fill it out. But that's just kind of what I'm thinking for now. Again, it's still a lot of just putting down colors, but I'm keeping in mind a little more what might be useful now that we have the start of some sort of scene happening. And get some nice contrast here. So you'll notice there's a very sharp contrast of this teal against this pale yellow. And then we can just pull that out. And again, I'm using this brush with the long and short bristles. And now all of this that's here, I can turn into like coral or perhaps some fish. It's just kind of whatever the shapes want to be from here now that something is taking shape beyond just abstraction. And if you're doing this and you just prefer the straight abstraction without any sort of, you know, discernible shapes or objects, just do that then. There's no need to, I guess, follow where I go if you don't feel like it. Like, definitely, you know, it's for you, so play how you would like to play. Another fun thing you can do if you have a wide angle brush like this, and you're going to want a decent amount of paint, and I'm using matte medium with it to kind of, it waters it down in the sense that it makes it a little more liquidy and more soft to work with, but it still keeps the pigment and the texture of the paint. So what you can do is, if you have it straight down, go and then press some and lift up, and then press down and lift up, press down, lift up, and you get these fun ribbons, which work very well for, you know, a jellyfish kind of style. If I go just along the edge there, because both paints are wet, they'll bleed a little bit at the edges together, which is a nice way to make the, I guess, tentacles that I'm doing here seem cohesive, like it's part of the same tentacle, but that it is catching light in a certain way, or that it's creating shadow. So it gives it a little bit of visual dimension. So now I'm using just a normal, kind of standard point round brush. And if you need a little, you know, inspiration, if you get to a point where you're like, oh, this looks like undersea, you know, feel free to look up pictures of coral or underwater fish or whatever. You know, if you want a visual reference or reminder of what, you know, what you kind of might be going for, you can absolutely do that. It's not like cheating or anything. This is all about you doing what you want to do and enjoying it. And if you, you know, want to try a new thing, go for it. So what I'm doing here, I have some of this white, but it's very, very watery. And because of that, if there's little places where it still touches this black that is still wet, you'll notice it picks up, it's hopefully, this light is very inconvenient. I'll hold this up here. You can see how they're blending together because that white because the white is so wet. But it gives you some fun drips and some fun color blending there too, where you're just letting the paint do whatever it feels like doing a little bit. You'll get some fun surprises when you let the paint just kind of be its own thing. So as I'm filling in the tentacles here, I'm actually wanting to keep a fair amount of implied line or implied form. So it's kind of like if you've ever done hair, you don't draw every strand of hair, you kind of draw like parts. So like this part here, you know, and then have it fill in more somewhere else to give that impression of all of those various hairs, because you can't really draw in something like that to fully capture the reality. You have to do sort of an implied reality, and that's what we're also playing with here. So I really like some of these long bits in the background that aren't necessarily tentacle shape or anything, but they do have that line to them. And so I want to keep that, because that's part of what made me kind of see this as a jellyfish form to begin with. And so I don't want to remove or hide all of those original kind of reminders of the form. So I'm keeping one side of it kind of light and the other side kind of dark. By doing that, I'm giving an implied light source. And so you feel like there is some sort of light coming from the surface of the water or from that direction. I'm sorry, the contrast of that light is really hard there. I know that makes it a little tricky to see what I'm doing, so thank you for your patience with that. There we go. So this paint that I'm using now, it's this high flow acrylic, and it's very, very liquidy, but I like to use it with this very long bristle brush. And it's very fun because it will give you these very clean lines. Like if you try a softer body paint or a very hard body paint, you'll notice you'll notice the brush doesn't hold on to the paint as long, because you'll get these kind of choppy bristle strokes where the brush will kind of dry up or not have as much saturation of the paint. And so when you're working with a very, very liquidy paint, the bristles maintain a consistent saturation, I guess, better. And so it's very, very fun because you can do just very long, you know, just long, fun lines. That's the word, lines. Okay, so I'm gonna let this bit over here dry some more before we get in there and kind of finish filling that out. So I'm gonna work over here, and then we're gonna get pretty close to, I think, being done once, which is fun. What I'm doing here, some of this is still wet, so I'm actually just picking up gently in a circular motion, kind of picking up some of the paint. So what that's doing is picking up just the dry bit, but it's allowing some of that previous color to come through. But again, it's giving it a much more textured appearance because you have all those layers and color variation of other paint on it. So you'll notice that I am not concerned too much about keeping this line here particularly clean between the background and what I've decided is my jellyfish form. If you want to keep that line cleaner, go for it. You know, I enjoy that sort of shift between foreground and background and those sort of boundaries changing depending where you put your perspective or where you put your focus. But just because that's my preference doesn't mean it's yours. And I think that if you like it a different way, by all means, you know, do it how you like to do it. So all I'm doing here is implied shapes, because inevitably, if you sort of have something that's kind of dark on the bottom and allow it to mix with the background as it comes up, you know, you're making an implied depth. You're making something that looks like it has a top and a bottom, or a foreground and a background. You know, things in the front are brighter, they're more detailed, and they're bigger. As you go back, in this case it would get darker because there's no light source back there, but it would get dimmer or more gray or more neutral colored, smaller, and then less detailed. So if you're trying to make something with depth, you can play off that pretty easily with fairly simple shapes. And then what we can do is make just kind of some shapes there, and then go up a bit more line to them. I like that better. And then even this you can take up. And now what I'm doing by pressing it like this, it just blends it a little differently than just a straight. So if I just rub it like this, you'll get these kind of marks. When you press like this, you get a more I don't know what to call it. You get a different texture. I don't speckle is the best word I can think of, but that doesn't feel quite right. So it just gives you another textural option basically. Okay, so then we let that side dry. Come back and play over here a little more. I have this gold iridescent, which I've started to really enjoy over the last few years. There's a number of these. And they add an interesting component, especially in real life. It's hard to see over video, I'm sure. But especially if it's over dark, like a black or a navy, it has this iridescence to it. And so at certain angles or certain light, you see different shades. So it can be like a gold to sort of a green. And there's a number of different iridescents too, where it could be a violent iridescent or orange, blue, reddish. And so they're very, very fun to just kind of explore as well. So what I'm doing here is just trying to add a little more jellyfishness to the form here. And then I'm using this gold as well to give it a bit of an iridescence as a jellyfish. But again, I'm not fully coloring the whole thing in. I'm leaving parts to show that background because, again, that background is what it kind of inspired the form to begin with, and so I don't want to fully take that away. And then I'm just adding in more matte medium because that helps blend and spread my colors around as well. Actually, I think I'm going to bring this guy down like that. The main thing to consider when you're sort of developing out your final shapes or your sort of last figures is just keeping in mind where your contrast is, keeping in mind how people will know, oh, this shape is separate from the background. And there's no particular right way to do that. In fact, if you want them to be very subtle and so there isn't a huge contrast, that's completely fine as well. The only thing is if you're struggling or getting frustrated because something isn't showing up the way you'd like, one thing I suggest is just stepping away for a little bit because while frustration is certainly a normal response, it's not enjoyable and you don't need to feel frustrated. So, you know, just take a step back for a little bit, take a breath and remember why you enjoy it, and then come back and remember there's no wrong way. But also it could just be that something isn't getting emphasized in the way you like, or that something isn't clear in a way that you're hoping that you would like it to be clear. So sometimes just stepping back and just, you know, grabbing some tea or a cup of coffee and relaxing and just looking at it for a little bit. I often hang my art in my living room above the television. And sometimes I just, you know, in the middle of a piece, take time to just really look at it and look at it from different angles. And, you know, especially if I haven't found anything in it yet, just kind of continue turning it to see what comes out. And what I'm doing now, I don't think this is actually any part of a jellyfish. I'm just playing with designs again because it's abstract and they're fun. And I like these little subtle details in my work. I think they give interesting bits to kind of draw the eye in. And that happens to me all the time. It's not a big deal. If you drop a little daub of paint somewhere, you know, you can leave it, you can blend it in, you can wait till it dries and paint over it. It's never a big deal. So this is just that long bristle brush again, but flat, and then just kind of moving it that way. And that will also create an interesting texture option there. So you'll notice just from playing a lot of fun ways that you can use brushes that aren't necessarily the immediate way that you would initially kind of think to use it. I have these fun things that do dots. However, you can always just use the end of a brush as well. But if you're somebody who ends up wanting to do a lot of dot work like mandalas and stuff, these are fun and probably worth investing in because it will be easier to use, maintain, and clean than using the brush ends or the tip ends of brushes. But especially if you're just kind of playing and you don't really know if this is something you'd want to invest money in, the end of your brush will work perfectly well. All right. So from here, if you wanted to, you could keep filling it out. You could add more tentacles. You could play with the detail here, making it less detailed as you go back. You know, if you wanted to, you could just do a cool design in the background, make it, you know, your own thing. You could add some patterning over it. There's all sorts of ways that you could play with it from here if you wanted to keep going. We are done. So I hope you enjoyed figuring out what this painting was with me, and I know I certainly enjoyed sharing this process with you. Take care, be kind to yourself, goodbye.